Good evening, YouTube. Magnum 357 coming to you here for another 357 SIG reloading video. I'm going to walk you through my process of reloading 357 SIG. Maybe you can get some pointers off of it and start using it in your reloading habits. I'm using an RL550 4-station progressive reloading press. I've got extreme bullets, 124 grain flat points, very nice looking projectiles. These are the thin copper plating. They do have a heavy copper plate that's, I don't know if it's made for 357 SIG, but it definitely helps. But I'll combat that with keeping the velocities a little bit lower, which is basically keeping the pressures a little bit lower so you can fire it through your 357 SIG handguns without any problem. I've got my Lee single stage press set up with my 40 Smith & Wesson resizing die with the decapping pin removed, and I'll tell you why I've got the decapping pin removed a little bit later. Case lube, Alliant powder power pistol, scale, calipers, everything looks like it's good to go. Bench is clean. Oh, and over here, reloading manual. I always keep that open to the page of the caliber that I'm reloading, just for double checking reference. I've actually got 3 different reloading manuals, and I cross-reference all 3 of them with the same powder if they offer it, just to make sure. This one's the Hornady manual. I like it because I use Hornady bullets, and the Hornady manual offers all sorts of reloading data for their bullets, obviously, but I do have the Lyman and others and Alliant that you can get for free if you request it off of their website. So for starters, to resize the 357 SIG case, traditionally you would have to use some sort of case lubricant. Right there I've got the Hornady One Shot, and I've got some Blaster silicone lubricant that I picked up at an auto parts store. It's something that I'm testing out. I've read some mixed reviews on the internet about using a silicone based lubricant for pistol and or rifle brass. Some say that the silicone lubricant can actually penetrate deeper into the brass and potentially damage or render the primer inoperable, leaving you with a dead round. I've got a couple of batches of pistol and rifle loaded with the Blaster. I'm letting them sit on the shelf for, I'll probably let them sit over the entire summer. Let the heat help penetrate some of that brass and see if I can actually replicate what they're talking about. Maybe it takes years, I don't know, but I'll at least give it a full season, and I'll report back on that. But since I've been using this method with resizing the brass with the 40 Smith & Wesson resizing die, I haven't needed to use case lubricant, as most of you know that using a 40 Smith & Wesson resizing die on 357 SIG, you can resize about 80% of the brass, 80% of the length of the brass with that 40 Smith & Wesson resizing die, and you don't have to use the lubricant. The exception is obviously the case neck. For time purposes, all of this brass has been resized and deprimed, tumbled and polished. But first, I'm going to go ahead and walk you through setting up my progressive press. So I've got a piece of brass that has been fired, primer still in it, dead primer. I use that to set up my powder charge that I've got right here. I've got my hopper full of power pistol powder. I send it over to station number 2, turn on my scale real quick, and zero out my scale to a piece of brass. I take my piece of brass, put it in the press, run it to the top, go ahead and throw a charge, and what that does is it lets me set up my press without having to use one of my clean pieces of brass, because if you've ever set up the powder charge on a progressive press, you're running the handle 4 or 5, I like to run it 10 times to get an accurate powder charge. And I'd rather not run that with a live primer in it. I'll do it with a dead round, just for safety's sake. It also lets me check the amount of flare that you can see here that I put on the case mouth. See if I can get the camera to focus. There we go. So since these are a lead plated copper round, I haven't checked them, but I think they're sized to 358. So that's 0.001 larger than your obvious 357, which is most of your jacketed rounds. So a light flare is recommended, or at least I recommend it. I don't know if anybody else does. It helps start the round to seat, because the problems you can come into with the 357 SIG is because there is so little bullet support on the case neck. If you have no flare on that case, you set a bullet on top of it, run it through your press, it can actually crush the bullet down into the case and basically ruin the entire case. You throw it out. It's or you pull your bullet, your powder, and carefully push out your primer and reuse it if you want to, but it essentially ruins your case. So now that I've got the powder charge set where I want it, put my cap on it, and we go reloading. So I've got my clean 357 SIG brass, load one into station 1, run the press, and you can barely even feel that die doing any work, because all it's doing is resizing the neck. Pull it back down, push it forward, sets a primer in. Now I've got a brand new primer. I can go ahead and put my pins back in since I've got my press set up. I went ahead and pre-set up the bullet seating die to the depth that I want. So I can take that, spin it over to number 2, put a case back into number 1, and now station 2 is going to flare and charge the case. Station number 1 is going to resize the neck, run the press, push it forward, seats a new primer. On to station 3, new piece of brass, get a bullet, and I'm running just a little bit slower than I normally would because I'm using one hand. The other hand is on the camera, as you can see. So let me show you a little bit more about what I was talking about on having a slight flare on the case. I'll go ahead and take one and set it here that doesn't have a flare, pull that one straight out of the bucket. So as you can see, the bullet will actually set down into the case just a little bit. On progressive presses, it really helps to have your bullet sitting there and sitting straight, because you don't always want to hold it. You can if you want. Running your press with your fingers on your bullet, I've pinched my fingers when I've gotten into a hurry, so that's not ideal. But as you can see, if you take that bullet and set it on there, it's almost impossible to get it to set on straight without a flare. So I like to put a flare on the case as little as possible to get that bullet to set on there straight, because it is a 357 SIG, and the more you work the end of that brass, the shorter its lifespan is going to be, and the harder it is to get it to crimp back in straight. So we'll go ahead and run the press again. We'll seat a bullet, resize the neck, charge a case, and flare it at the same time. And there we go. That one is seated. It still requires a crimp. So we spin the press, get another piece of brass, get another bullet, set her on top as straight as we can. Then we'll go ahead and run the press again, and that last stage is going to crimp the brass and then we can spit it out. And here we go. We have got a completed 357 SIG round. I've got 2 of them sitting here. There's one. So those, in my opinion, are beautiful. So in the previous video, I was talking about one of the problems you can have with a 357 SIG round is, especially with my RCBS die set, this guy right here has the capability of roll crimping the case. So when you're seating a bullet, you can roll crimp it at the same time as you would with any Lee 3-piece die set, pistol die set. It's a pretty common set, and what it does is it roll crimps into the bullet. And the problem you get with 357 SIG is, since there is so little case neck support for the bullet, you can actually crush that case neck into the larger portion of the case and create a bulge right in this area here. As you can see where the case neck turns into. So to remedy that, and I showed this in my last video, you take the completed round and you run it back through your 40 Smith & Wesson sizing die. And you see it, it's kind of dark, but you see it down in there. And that's the reason why I have the decapping pin removed. It's essentially a 6-station process, 2 of them being off of the press. But it will remove the bulge basically anywhere in that case, because since I run it all the way through, anywhere from here all the way down to the bottom. Lee does make something called a bulge buster for 40 Smith & Wesson. That's for most Glock shooters. That if you've ever seen a Glock barrel, a 40 Smith & Wesson Glock barrel, the portion of the barrel that's right in this area here is not supported. The case is not supported, rather, and you can have the bottom of the live round blow out and damage a portion of your gun. But as you can see, run it through the 40 Smith & Wesson sizing die twice, one to resize it, one to remove the bulges, and you've got a round that will seat perfectly almost every time. I say almost because I've had some funky brass in the past. I apologize for not having a case gauge, but the barrel that you shoot the rounds in will suffice as a case gauge, and is almost the best one you have because it is your chamber. As always, check your powder charges, check your overall lengths just to make sure you don't have any pressure signs, and then you're good to go. Some might ask, why do you reload 357 SIG, or even why do you even have it? That is such an expensive round to shoot. That is such a pain in the butt to reload. Yes, you're right. If you're going to buy your 357 SIG, it can be very expensive. If you're going to reload it, it can be very difficult. If you're just using a single stage press, it could take you all evening just to run 50 rounds to go to the range for one day. It actually helps to have a progressive, and it helps to have some experience in the problems that it can create. There's a lot of good information out on the web that you can read about it. I suggest you do a lot of reading before you get into reloading 357 SIG, because it is one of those more difficult ones. I remember watching a Hickok 45 video where he said that he won't even get into it because of the difficulties of it. But and that's pretty much the issue with any Wildcat round. And a Wildcat round is something that's a parent case necked down to accept a different size bullet. That's basically it. I was going to go through, I've got a couple of more reasons. So anybody that's a competitive shooter, your 357 SIG will actually meet your power factors. You can, without running an astronomical amount of pressure, and I can demonstrate that. So that was a 124 grain bullet. I'm using power pistol. As you can see, this is the 9mm loading. So all the way up to 5.7 grains and beyond, which is basically a 9mm plus P, where you would need to be to run your power factor for a 9mm. You're pushing 1100 to 1150 feet per second. My 357 SIG with the same 124 grain bullet, running 1150 feet per second, you're down towards the lower end of the pressure range. You got 1150 and 1200. So I was loading basically right in here. So as you know, you've got a 124 grain bullet. You actually get a little bit less felt recoil than if you were to run a 40 Smith & Wesson if you wanted to make power factor. Another good reason is the reliability. You know, since it's a necked cartridge, it feeds very reliably, much more so than a 40 Smith & Wesson. And it's a very effective defensive cartridge. That's exactly, probably, actually it is the main reason why I have it. It's a sidearm that I take into the woods. I load a very, very hot, almost above maximum Hornady XTP that I take into the woods with me, and I have no issue walking up against some hogs or coyotes and feeling undergunned with a 357 SIG, because I can essentially create a 357 Magnum round out of what is it, a 15 round, if I wanted to go with the larger magazine. So yeah, I can throw 15 rounds in plus one instead of having 6, in which I do have a 357 Magnum. I'll do some reloading videos on that one as well. But if you got any questions, go ahead and shoot me a message. I'll respond with what I can, answer any questions that you have. Good luck reloading 357 SIG. It's a lot of fun. Good luck shooting.